Grandpa stopped mid-bite. "Wait, you pay your parents' rent." I froze. Before I could answer, my dad waved his hand. "Your sister has 2 kids, she needs help more." The table went silent and Grandpa set down his fork. Nobody expected what he said next. "My name is Maya, and at 28 years old, I finally stopped letting my family use me as their personal doormat." It was Thanksgiving evening, and the dining room of my parents' sprawling Atlanta suburban home was suffocatingly warm, filled with the rich, heavy scents of roasted turkey sage stuffing and sweet potato pie. To anyone looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows from the outside, we looked like the ultimate American success story. We were a prominent African-American family in an exclusive, highly sought-after zip code, anchored by my father Marcus, a respected local pastor, and my mother Vivian, a woman who treated social status and appearances as her primary religion. The house itself was a beautiful, massive piece of real estate. My grandfather Harrison had purchased outright 10 years ago to ensure our family always had a solid, debt-free foundation. But inside those expensive, perfectly painted walls, the foundation of our actual family was entirely rotten. I was standing at the edge of the long mahogany table, quietly gathering empty crystal wine glasses and clearing away the remains of the main course, while I stacked heavy porcelain plates, playing my designated role of the dutiful invisible servant. My 32-year-old sister Chloe sat comfortably at the head of the table. Chloe was the undisputed golden child of the family. She had recently graduated from a prestigious medical school and never missed a single opportunity to remind everyone of her elevated status. Right now, she was casually filing her perfectly manicured nails right over the linen tablecloth, completely ignoring the chaotic mess of half-eaten food and crumpled napkins around her. She was too busy loudly bragging to our extended relatives about her brand-new designer handbag. "It is highly exclusive," she purred, holding up the pristine leather bag for my mother to admire. "You have to be on a waiting list for 2 years just to be allowed the privilege to purchase it. Honestly, it cost more than what some people make in half a year. But when you are a doctor, you have to maintain a certain image. People judge you based on what you carry." My mother looked at Chloe with absolute uncritical adoration, reaching out to stroke the expensive leather as if it were a holy relic. "You absolutely deserve it, baby," my mother cooed, her voice dripping with pride. "You have worked so hard to get where you are. You need to show people your success." Meanwhile, my father nodded along, a wide, proud smile plastered on his face, as if Chloe buying an overpriced purse was a monumental achievement for the entire community. Nobody offered to help me carry the heavy stacks of dishes into the kitchen. I was completely used to it. For years I had been treated less like a daughter, and more like an inconvenience they simply had to tolerate. In their eyes, I was the underachiever, the quiet, socially awkward disappointment, who had supposedly failed to live up to the grand family legacy. I worked as a data analyst, a job they deemed utterly boring and visible, and unimpressive compared to Chloe walking around a hospital wearing a white coat. They did not know the truth about my career yet, and I had spent years swallowing my pride, keeping my head down, and enduring their constant passive-aggressive jabs about my lifestyle. I gripped a stack of plates, tightly swallowing the familiar bitter lump of frustration in my throat. I wiped down the polished wood of the table, keeping my eyes averted from their self-congratulatory smiles. I just wanted to finish cleaning, retreat to my dark space downstairs, and endure the rest of this toxic holiday in peace. But Grandpa Harrison was watching. At 75 years old, my grandfather was a proud traditional man who believed in hard work, honesty, and treating people with basic respect. He had worked grueling, physically demanding jobs his entire life to build wealth for his children, hoping they would be better than this. He sat near the center of the table, his sharp, observant eyes taking in the entire dynamic. He noticed that I had barely eaten because I was too busy serving everyone else. He noticed my mother praising Chloe while completely ignoring my existence. He had always been the only person in this family who saw me for who I really was, and he had never been one to bite his tongue when he saw injustice. As Chloe seamlessly transitioned from bragging about her bag to boasting about an upcoming insanely expensive luxury vacation, she was planning to the Maldives. Grandpa Harrison suddenly turned his attention completely away from her. He looked directly at me, his expression softening with genuine fatherly concern. Maya, he said, his deep, commanding voice cutting effortlessly through Chloe's endless self-absorbed chatter. Everyone at the table paused, surprised by the sudden interruption. You work incredibly hard, sweetheart. You have been at your firm for a few years now, putting in long hours every single week. Why do not you ever take a trip? You should be out seeing the world, enjoying your 20s, treating yourself to nice things, instead of always standing here clearing our plates. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. The sudden shift in attention away from the golden child did not sit well with my parents. My mother shot me a severe warning glare from across the table, her eyes silently demanding that I give a polite, vague answer and brush off the question. Chloe stopped filing her nails, letting out a small, condescending scoff, clearly annoyed that the spotlight had shifted to her supposedly lesser sibling. Normally, I would have mumbled something about being a homebody, or loving my routine, or saving up for a rainy day. I would have played my part to keep the fragile fake family peace intact. But tonight, listening to them brag about wealth while treating me like a peasant, I was so incredibly tired. The sheer bone-deep exhaustion of playing the obedient, invisible daughter suddenly overwhelmed my usual restraint. The words slipped out of my mouth with a cool, detached honesty before I could weigh the consequences of speaking them aloud. I cannot really afford to travel right now, Grandpa. I replied, my voice steady, ringing clearly in the quiet dining room. Paying $2,500 a month in rent to Mom and Dad just to live down in the unfinished basement does not leave me with much spare cash for luxury vacations to the Maldives. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. It was the kind of quiet that rings in your ears heavy with sudden dangerous tension. Chloe dropped her nail file onto the table with a sharp clatter. My mother's face paled instantly, her polite, performative holiday smile freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. My father gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning stark white as he stared at me in horror, realizing his carefully constructed image was cracking. Grandpa Harrison froze completely. His fork loaded with a piece of turkey hovered halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered his hand, resting the silverware against his plate with a deliberate metallic clink. His dark eyes darted from me to my father, his brow furrowing deeply as his mind tried to process the mathematical and moral impossibility of what I had just revealed. Wait, Grandpa said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, rumbling register that made even Chloe shrink back in her chair. You pay your parents' rent. My father immediately jumped into damage control mode, waving his hands dismissively and forcing a loud, nervous chuckle that sounded completely unnatural and desperate. Dad, please let us not get into household finances at the dinner table. He stammered, his pastoral charm failing him entirely as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Maya is a grown adult now. She is living under our roof, eating our food, so she needs to learn responsibility and contribute to the household. Chloe has 2 young children and incredibly high private school tuitions to worry about. She needs our financial help much more than Maya does. It is just about sharing the family burden fairly. But Grandpa Harrison did not look at my father. He ignored the pathetic attempt at justification completely. He kept his piercing gaze fixed solely on me, the confusion on his face rapidly morphing into profound shock and then into a slow, burning, righteous anger. Rent, Grandpa repeated the words, sounding foreign, absurd, and bitter on his tongue. He turned his head slowly to glare at my father, his voice rising in volume and intensity until it commanded the entire room. You are charging your own daughter $2,500 a month to live in a dark, damp basement. For what possible reason, Marcus? This house was paid off completely 10 years ago. I made sure this family had a debt-free home. There was no mortgage. There was no burden. Grandpa's last sentence landed harder than any shout. My father stared at him, then at me, as if the problem was not the rent, but the fact that I had said the number out loud. He tried to recover the smooth authority he used from the pulpit every Sunday, straightening his shoulders and lowering his voice into that measured, reasonable tone that had intimidated me since childhood. Dad, Marcus said, Maya is 28 years old. She is not a child. Adults contribute when they live under somebody else's roof. We are not charging her because we are cruel. We are teaching her responsibility. Grandpa Harrison's eyebrows rose. Responsibility, $2,500 a month for an unfinished basement in a house with no mortgage. My mother cut in before my father could answer. Vivian folded her napkin with careful, irritated precision, as if Grandpa had committed the social offense. Maya has always had trouble understanding what it takes to maintain a household at this level. Utilities, landscaping taxes, entertaining church obligations. None of that is free. My father spread his hands. And there is another issue. Chloe has 2 children. Their private school tuition is enormous. She has residency expenses, professional dues, childcare, everything. Brad is building a company. They are raising a family. Maya is single. She has no children. It is only fair that the person with fewer responsibilities contributes more so the family members carrying the heavier load can have support. Grandpa looked from Marcus to Chloe, then back to me. You are telling me Maya pays you $30,000 a year so you can help Chloe pay private school tuition? Nobody answered. Grandpa's question had done something none of them expected. It forced the money to have a destination. Once someone asked where it went, phrases like responsibility and family burden stopped sounding noble. Brad finally did. He had been carving another slice from the turkey as if this entire conversation bored him. Now he laid the carving fork down and kept the long knife in his hand. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of expensive confidence, and pointed the blunt side of the blade in my direction. Come on, Maya, he said. Stop acting like a victim. You live with your parents. You eat their food. You use their address. You have had years to move out if you hate it so much. That money you pay probably barely covers what you cost this household. I stared at the knife, then at him. He was not threatening me with it. That would have been too obvious. He was doing something more familiar, using a careless gesture to remind everyone that he believed he owned the room. Brad smirked. Some of us have real pressure. I have employees depending on me, investors, deadlines. Chloe has patients and 2 children. Your parents have a congregation watching everything they do. You sit behind a computer and run spreadsheets. You do not have a family of your own, so you have no idea what it costs to build something that matters. Chloe gave a satisfied little laugh. Exactly. My mother nodded as if Brad had just delivered a sermon. I set the plates I was holding back on the sideboard before my grip cracked one of them. 4 years of swallowing insults had taught me something useful when people were certain you would remain quiet. The truth sounded louder than rage. A startup, I said. Brad's smile tightened. That is what you are calling it tonight. His fingers curled around the knife handle. What is that supposed to mean? I walked back to the table and rested both palms lightly on the wood. It means I have listened to all of you. Call my rent a contribution, a lesson, a family obligation, whatever phrase made stealing from me easier to live with. But a little over $100,000 of what I paid into this house did not go to utilities. It did not go to property taxes. It did not go to Chloe's children. My father's eyes snapped toward me. My mother's mouth opened. Brad stopped moving. I continued before any of them could cut me off. It went to you, Brad. The knife lowered an inch. I had spent months comparing transfers dates and the excuses my parents gave me whenever I asked where my money was going. Once I opened this door, Thanksgiving would never return to normal. Brad laughed, but there was no humor in it. You have no access to my finances. No, I said. But I know what my parents transferred. I know when the transfers left their account. I know what happened immediately afterward. My father stood halfway from his chair. Maya, that is enough. I turned to him. Is it because Grandpa asked where the money went? Grandpa Harrison did not take his eyes off Marcus. Let her answer. That single sentence changed the balance of the table. My father had spent years using authority to stop conversations before they became dangerous. Grandpa had just removed that protection. I looked at Brad again. The first large transfer was followed 3 days later by the down payment on the Porsche sitting in the driveway right now. The next series lined up with your trips to Las Vegas. Not conferences, not investor meetings. Casino weekends, hotel suites, cash advances, high-limit tables. Brad gave a contemptuous snort. You are making assumptions. I am describing dates. Those were business trips. Then your business apparently operates out of blackjack pits. Chloe slammed her nail file down. Maya, you are disgusting. Brad works harder than anyone you know. I looked at her designer bag, then toward the front windows where the outline of the Porsche was visible beneath the driveway lights. The whole family had been built around expensive objects that were supposed to prove they were successful. The objects looked different to me now. They looked like receipts. I turned to Grandpa. Roughly $100,000 of the money Mom and Dad collected from me has been redirected to Brad over the last several years. Some of it helped pay for that car. Some of it disappeared during casino trips. Some of it went into what he keeps calling a startup. Though I have never seen a product, a client list, or a legitimate revenue statement. Brad shoved his chair backwards so hard it scraped the floor. Be very careful, he said. I did not move. Careful about what? About accusing me of stealing. I never said you stole it from them. I said they took it from me and gave it to you. My mother's hand flew to her chest. We did not take anything. You paid rent willingly. Willingly, I repeated. You threatened to put my belongings on the curb when I asked for 1 month at a lower rate after my student loan payment increased. That was discipline, my father snapped. No, that was leverage. Grandpa's expression hardened with every sentence. He glanced toward the basement door, then toward Chloe's handbag, then finally at the luxury car visible through the window. For the first time, he was not seeing separate family choices. He was seeing a system one daughter charged for the privilege of being tolerated so the other daughter's household could perform wealth. Brad rose fully now. His face had begun to redden, the pleasant mask slipping away. You do not understand a damn thing about investment, he said. The Porsche is part of my professional image. Clients expect success. Vegas is where deals happen. You think people build companies by sitting in a basement counting pennies? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. There it was, the insult beneath every explanation. I was small because I lived in the basement. He was important because he spent my money loudly. Grandpa Harrison looked at Brad with open disgust. Son, he said to Marcus without taking his eyes off my brother-in-law. Why is this man explaining what happened to money you took from your own daughter? My father started to speak. I beat him to it, because Dad knew Grandpa, Mom knew. Chloe knew enough not to ask questions. They all decided that Brad's image, Chloe's lifestyle, and their reputation mattered more than whether I could ever climb out of debt. Brad's jaw tightened. I let my gaze drop deliberately to the expensive watch on his wrist, and then return to his face. Startup, I said softly. You mean the $100,000 of my so-called rent that helped buy a new Porsche and got fed into casino tables in Vegas. The knife hit the serving platter with a metallic clatter. His smile disappeared. Brad turned a violent shade of crimson. He slammed both his hands flat onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal glasses and sloshing expensive red wine onto the white linen cloth. Who the hell do you think you are talking to? He spat, dropping all pretense of his usual polite, Southern gentleman act. You are living under your parents' roof, eating their food, and you have the nerve to sit here and disrespect me. My business venture hit a temporary roadblock. That is how the corporate world works. That is something a basement-dwelling data entry clerk would never understand. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, my mother, Vivian, threw herself into the fray, rushing to defend her precious white son-in-law. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger right at my face. Maya, you ungrateful, bitter girl, how dare you ruin Thanksgiving with these vicious lies? You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always hated seeing Chloe happy. Brad is a visionary. He is trying to build an empire for this family, and all you can do is tear him down, because you have absolutely nothing going for yourself. Jealous, I repeated, my voice deadly calm, cutting through her hysterical shouting. You think I am jealous of a man who manipulated you into kicking your own daughter out of her bedroom? I stood up slowly, tossing my crumpled napkin onto the table. Let us talk about family support, Mom. Let us talk about 4 years ago. I had just graduated college, drowning in student loan debt, working 80-hour weeks just to keep my head above water. I needed a safe place to land for a few months, but Chloe decided her seasonal wardrobe needed more space. And Brad, the great visionary, convinced you both that my childhood bedroom would make the perfect walk-in closet for his wife. My father tried to interrupt, his pastoral voice booming across the room. We gave you a place to stay, Maya. We put a roof over your head. You put me in a damp, unfinished, leaking basement with exposed insulation. I fired back, not breaking eye contact with him. And you charged me $2,500 a month for it. You charged your own flesh and blood 50% more than the average market rate in Atlanta. When I cried and begged you for a break so I could afford my student loan payments, what did you say to me, Dad? Do you remember? My father swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward Grandpa Harrison, who was sitting perfectly still, radiating a terrifying silent fury. You told me it was a lesson in the school of hard knocks, I said, making sure every single person at the table heard me. You said you were teaching me financial responsibility. You claimed the money was going into a family emergency fund. But that was a lie, was it not? Because every single dime I bled to give you went straight into Brad's pockets to fund his luxury cars, his gambling trips, and his fake businesses. You extorted your own daughter to finance your son-in-law and his gambling addiction. You shut your mouth right now, Chloe shrieked, her face twisted in ugly defensive rage. Brad is a good husband. He provides for us. You are just a sad, lonely woman who wants to destroy my marriage because nobody will ever love you. You should be down on your knees thanking Mom and Dad for not throwing you out on the street. My mother nodded vigorously, tears of manufactured victimhood streaming down her face. We did what we had to do to protect our family. Chloe has children to feed. You are single. You have no responsibilities. It is your duty to step up. If you had an ounce of respect for the sacrifices we have made, you would apologize to Brad right this second. Apologize, I asked, tilting my head, genuinely amazed by the sheer depth of their delusion. I will absolutely never apologize to a parasite. That was the breaking point. My father Marcus let out a roar of absolute rage. His chair screeched loudly against the hardwood floor as he stood up, his face twisted with a violent anger I had never seen from him before. He raised his right hand high in the air, stepping around the table, fully intending to strike me across the face to silence me and protect his crumbling facade of authority. But the blow never landed. A sharp, deafening crash shattered the tension in the room. Grandpa Harrison had grabbed his heavy crystal water goblet and smashed it violently against the center of the mahogany table. Shards of thick glass flew across the roasted turkey and cranberry sauce, silencing the entire room in a single terrifying heartbeat. Marcus Grandpa Harrison bellowed, his voice vibrating with a commanding, terrifying authority that made my father freeze in his tracks. Do not you dare raise your hand at my granddaughter. My father lowered his arm, instantly shrinking back like a scolded child. He opened his mouth to offer another pathetic pastoral excuse, but my grandfather did not let him speak. He stepped forward, leaning his heavy hands on the table, his eyes locked onto my father with pure, unadulterated disgust. You have been charging Maya rent for a house you do not even own, Grandpa said, his voice deadly and precise. You took her hard-earned money, and you handed it over to a man who gambles it away. But that is not even the worst part, is it, Marcus? Grandpa Harrison stood up straight, his sharp gaze cutting through my father and his remaining lies. I know your finances, son. I know exactly what your church pays you. So you better tell me the truth right here, right now, in front of God and everyone in this room. Where did you get the money to give Brad $100,000 when your annual pastor salary is only $60,000 a year? For a terrifying moment, the only sound in the dining room was the heavy, ragged breathing of my father. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. That was when my mother Vivian realized she had to take control of the narrative before the perfect image she had spent decades building completely collapsed. She let out a sharp, dramatic gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Right on cue, tears began to well up in her eyes, spilling over her perfectly applied makeup. It was a flawless performance. I had seen her use this exact same tactic 100 times before, whenever she was caught in a lie or needed to manipulate the church board. She rushed around the shattered glass on the table and threw her arms around my father, positioning herself between him and Grandpa Harrison like a martyr shielding her family from an unjust attack. "Oh, Dad, please," my mother cried, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "Please do not look at Marcus that way. You do not understand the incredible pressure we are under in this community. You do not know what it takes to maintain our standing." Grandpa Harrison did not soften. His posture remained rigid, his jaw set in stone. He stared at her tears with absolute zero sympathy. "I asked a simple question, Vivian. Where did the money come from?" My mother let out a loud, shuddering sob, pressing her face against my father's shoulder for a second before turning back to plead her case. She looked around the room as if we were the ones being unreasonable, as if we were the villains attacking a devoted, loving mother. "We were just trying to do the right thing for our family," she wailed, gesturing frantically toward Chloe and Brad. "You know how people talk in Atlanta. You know the expectations placed on us. Marcus is a respected pastor. We are members of the most exclusive social clubs. We have an image to uphold. When Chloe married a white man, people whispered. When she went to medical school, people watched our every move, waiting for us to fail." She paused to wipe a tear from her cheek, her voice dropping into a desperate pleading register. "Chloe is a doctor now. She is the absolute pride of our entire lineage. She cannot be seen struggling or driving a beat-up car, and Brad is a brilliant businessman. He has so much potential. He just needed a little push, a little capital to get his ideas off the ground. We had to invest in him. We had to show everyone that our daughter married a successful, wealthy man. If his startup takes off, it elevates all of us. We were just protecting the family name." I stood there listening to her twisted logic, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. She was literally justifying stealing from her own daughter to fund a false reality. She believed that Chloe appearing wealthy and Brad driving a Porsche was somehow a noble cause, a mandatory sacrifice that I was simply obligated to fund. Grandpa Harrison looked at her in disgust. "So to protect your fake social status, you extorted your youngest daughter, you made her live in a basement and took her hard-earned money to fund this charade." My mother's posture instantly changed. The tears stopped flowing. The victim act vanished, replaced immediately by a venomous defensive rage. She whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes narrowing with pure contempt. She pointed a trembling finger right at my chest. "Do not you dare paint her as a victim." My mother spat, her voice growing sharp and vicious. "Maya is not some innocent martyr. She is a selfish, ungrateful child who has never understood the sacrifices required to be part of a highly educated, successful family. Look at her. Look at how she behaves." She took a step toward me, her face contorted with anger. "You are just a lowly data analyst, Maya. You sit behind a computer screen all day typing numbers for people who do not even know your name. You have no ambition, no prestige, and absolutely no understanding of what it takes to survive in high society. You do not know the pressure Chloe's faces every single day in the medical field. You do not know the stress Brad carries trying to build a corporate empire. You are just an ordinary, unremarkable girl with a boring little job." I did not flinch. I did not look away. I let her words wash over me, remembering all the times in my childhood when those exact same insults would have sent me running to my room in tears. But tonight they felt like nothing. They were just the desperate, empty threats of a woman losing control. "You purposely ruined this dinner," my mother continued, her voice echoing loudly in the dining room. "You could not stand seeing your sister happy. You could not stand seeing Brad treating her like a queen. You have always been jealous because Chloe has everything you will never have. She has a beautiful marriage, 2 gorgeous children, and a brilliant career. And what do you have, Maya? You have absolutely no one. Nobody wants to date you. Nobody wants to marry you. You are going to end up alone, bitter and miserable, and you are taking it out on us because you know you are a complete failure." Chloe crossed her arms over her chest, nodding in agreement with a smug, satisfied smirk on her face. Brad let out a loud, mocking laugh, clearly enjoying seeing me getting torn down. Even my father seemed to regain a tiny bit of his confidence, standing up straighter now that my mother had shifted the attack onto me. They all stared at me, waiting for me to break. They expected me to cry, to apologize, to back down and retreat into my shell, just like I had always done for the past 28 years. They were waiting for the old submissive Maya to surrender. But the old Maya was dead. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply let out a low, calm laugh that made the hairs on the back of my mother's neck stand up. The sound was so relaxed, so utterly devoid of fear that it made Chloe's smirk falter instantly. Lowly data analyst. I repeated, testing the words on my tongue, as if they were a joke, only I understood. I reached down to the floor where I had placed my large, understated leather tote bag before dinner. I unzipped the top and slowly reached inside. I pulled out a thick, heavy stock folder. Embossed on the front in gold foil was the logo of Morgan & Hayes, one of the largest, most ruthless financial acquisition firms on Wall Street. I tossed the heavy folder onto the mahogany table. It landed right on top of Brad's spilled wine with a loud, satisfying thud. "You know, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously smooth, "it is funny how much you obsess over success and prestige, yet you never actually bothered to ask what I do for a living. You assumed I was just a clerk because I did not brag about it at your country club dinners. But you are right about one thing. I do look at numbers all day." I locked eyes with my mother, watching the confusion and dread begin to pool in her gaze. "Let me educate you on some numbers. 3 years ago, I did not just get a job as an analyst. I founded a financial technology company. I built a predictive algorithm platform that manages wealth portfolios. And do you know what happened to that little unremarkable project of mine?" Nobody breathed. The entire room was paralyzed. I tapped my perfectly manicured fingernail against the gold logo on the folder. "Last month, that company was fully acquired by this firm. So tell me, Mom, since you are the great expert on corporate success and high society, do you happen to know what a global Wall Street firm pays to acquire a proprietary fintech platform from a lowly data analyst?" The silence in the dining room stretched so tight it felt like the crystal chandelier above us might shatter. My mother stared at the heavy gold-embossed folder on the table, her perfectly lined lips parted in mute shock. She blinked once, twice, as if hoping the document would simply vanish. My father looked like the air had been violently knocked out of his lungs. He reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers hovering just inches over the pristine leather cover, completely terrified to actually touch it. I did not wait for them to find their voices. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and let the reality of my life finally wash over the people who had treated me like dirt for 28 years. "You see, Mom?" I began, keeping my voice conversational but lethal. "I did not just build a simple app. I built a comprehensive algorithmic wealth management system designed to protect large-scale institutional investments. It is funny, Dad. You are the senior pastor of one of the wealthiest congregations in Atlanta. You oversee a massive building fund and several community development grants. Do you happen to know the name of the software your financial committee uses to manage all those millions?" My father swallowed hard. The color drained entirely from his face. His voice cracked as he spoke a single word. "Apex." I smiled. A wide, genuine smile that felt absolutely incredible. "Exactly. Apex Financial Solutions. And if you had ever bothered to read the bottom of the user agreement you signed last year, you would have seen my name listed as the founder and chief executive officer. I have been managing your church money for the last 12 months, Dad. And last month, Morgan and Hayes acquired Apex for $45 million in cash and stock options." I watched the exact moment the math hit them. $45 million. Brad's face contorted into an ugly mask of disbelief. He fell back into his chair, his jaw hanging open, the arrogant sneer completely wiped from his face. The man who had just screamed at me for not understanding the corporate world was currently staring at a woman whose net worth eclipsed his wildest, most desperate gambling fantasies. Chloe looked physically ill. The golden child, the perfect doctor who had spent her entire adult life making sure I knew my place beneath her heel, was suddenly suffocating in the shadow of my success. She stared at the folder, then at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate calculation. Her pristine designer handbag sitting on the table suddenly looked incredibly cheap. For years, Chloe had defined her entire worth by being better than me. She had paraded her medical degree, her white husband, and her suburban lifestyle in my face, using my supposed failures as the foundation for her own self-esteem. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head as her superiority complex shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Then the most predictable nauseating shift occurred. The venom vanished from Chloe's eyes, replaced instantly by a bright, completely fabricated warmth. She let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that echoed awkwardly in the silent room. She stood up from her chair, walked around the shattered glass of Grandpa Harrison's water goblet, and rushed toward me with her arms outstretched. "Maya, oh my goodness!" Chloe cried out, her voice dripping with thick, sugary affection. "Why on earth did you keep this a secret from us? This is incredible news. I am so incredibly proud of you, little sister." She reached out to hug me, but I stood up quickly, taking a deliberate step back. Her hands grasped at empty air. I looked at her with pure ice. "Do not touch me, Chloe," I said. Chloe dropped her hands, looking momentarily stung, but she recovered with terrifying speed. She plastered on a look of deep sisterly concern. "Maya, I know things got a little heated just now," she said, her voice soft and placating. "We were just stressed. You know how stressful the holidays can be. But this changes everything. You are a CEO. You are a major player in the financial world. We are family, Maya. Family is supposed to share in each other's success." She gestured eagerly toward Brad, who had suddenly sat up straight, his eyes gleaming with renewed hungry desperation. Brad even managed to force a stiff, incredibly fake smile onto his face. "Yeah, Maya." Brad chimed in, entirely abandoning the aggressive tone he had used to threaten me just 5 minutes ago. "That is incredibly impressive. 45 million. Wow. You know, with that kind of capital you need to be diversifying. My startup is right on the verge of a major breakthrough. We are just dealing with a temporary cash flow issue. If you came on board as an angel investor, say, with a $2 million seed injection, we could keep the equity in the family. We could build an empire together." I stared at the two of them. It was truly a masterclass in shamelessness. Just moments ago, they had justified kicking me out of my bedroom, tossing me into a damp basement, and extorting me for rent money. Now, because I had an 8-figure bank account, they were ready to play the loving, supportive family and hand me their empty begging bowls. My mother, sensing the shift in the room, immediately latched onto Chloe's pivot. She wiped her face, smoothing down her expensive dress. "Maya, baby, your sister is right," my mother pleaded, taking a step toward me. "We are family. We have always pushed you because we knew you had this kind of greatness inside you. And look at you now. You are brilliant. You can save this family. You know Brad has been struggling. You know Chloe has the private school tuitions. You can fix all of this for us. You can be the hero." I looked at my mother, then at my sister, and finally at Brad. The sheer audacity of their greed was almost suffocating. They did not see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a sudden, massive payout. They saw me as the solution to the financial mess they had created through their own arrogance and endless need to show off to the Atlanta elite. Grandpa Harrison watched the entire display with a look of profound disgust. He leaned heavily on his cane, shaking his head. "You people have absolutely no shame," he muttered, his voice full of sorrow. "You treat her like a stray dog, and the second you smell money, you start begging." I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my dress. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. I had waited years for this exact moment. I had worked through sleepless nights, anxiety, and profound loneliness, just to be able to stand in this room and hold their fate in the palm of my hand. "Invest in your startup, Brad?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous edge. "You want me to hand over $2 million to a man who took my rent money and blew it on blackjack tables and sports cars?" Brad forced a strange chuckle, tugging nervously at his collar. "Maya, come on. That is in the past. We are talking about the future now. We are talking about helping the family." "Help the family," I repeated, turning my gaze slowly back to my sister. Chloe nodded eagerly, her eyes wide with desperate hope. "Yes, Maya, please. Things have been so incredibly hard lately. Brad is under so much pressure. We just need a little help to get back on our feet. You have so much now, you would not even miss it." I picked up my wine glass from the table, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red vintage. I savored the taste, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out just a few seconds longer. I looked at the panicked, greedy faces of my parents and my sister, and I let the final devastating piece of my trap fall into place. I know our family is struggling, Chloe, I said, pronouncing every single word with absolute terrifying clarity. I know exactly how much trouble you are all in, because I know exactly how much money Mom and Dad secretly withdrew from mortgaging this house. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. My father let out a choked, desperate sound, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically struck. My mother stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the buffet table, her eyes wide with an absolute primal terror. Grandpa Harrison's head snapped toward my father so fast, it was a miracle he did not break his neck. Mortgaging the house. Grandpa roared, the sound shaking the glass in the window panes. I kept my eyes locked on my sister, watching the greedy hope completely drain from her face, replaced by a dawning, horrific realization. Yes, Chloe. I continued, my voice unwavering. The house Grandpa paid off in full 10 years ago. The house Mom and Dad quietly took a second mortgage out on just to hand you and Brad $500,000 so you could keep up your pathetic, fake, wealthy lifestyle. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Grandpa Harrison slowly turned his head to look at my father. The older man was trembling not from age but from a volcanic, entirely justified rage. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger at the man he had raised. Marcus, Grandpa said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a judge passing a death sentence. Tell me she is lying. Tell me right now that my granddaughter is making this up. Tell me you did not put a loan on the house I bought with my own blood and sweat. My father could not even look his own father in the eye. He stared down at his plate, his breathing shallow and rapid. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic whining sound came out. I did not give him the chance to construct another sermon or weave another deception. I reached into my tote bag one more time. I pulled out a thick stack of bank statements printed on crisp white paper and threw them across the table. They fanned out smoothly stopping right in front of Grandpa Harrison. I does not have to tell you, Grandpa, I said gently. The bank records tell the whole story, $500,000. That is the exact amount of the second mortgage my father secretly took out on this property 3 years ago. Grandpa Harrison picked up the top sheet. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the highlighted numbers. I watched his heart break in real time. He had worked grueling shifts at a manufacturing plant for 40 years, saving every penny to buy this house so his family would have generational wealth, and his own son had secretly signed it all away. How did you even do this? Grandpa demanded, his voice cracking with profound betrayal. My name is on the original deed. You could not have touched this equity without my authorization. My father finally broke. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, crying large, cowardly tears. I forged Harrison's authorization, he sobbed, his voice muffled by his palms. I copied his signature onto owner consent documents and submitted supporting paperwork that made it appear he had approved the transaction. I knew he would never agree to put the house at risk. I was desperate, Dad. I was so desperate. Desperate for what Grandpa roared, slamming his heavy hand on the table. You had no mortgage to pay. You had no debt hanging over your head. What could possibly drive a man of God to commit felony fraud against his own father? My mother tried to step in again, her face a mask of ruined makeup and panic. We needed to keep up appearances. Chloe was graduating from medical school. She needed a home in a good neighborhood to match her new status as a doctor. And Brad had some bad investments. We just wanted to help them get started. We were protecting our reputation. I laughed, a harsh, unforgiving sound that echoed off the high ceiling. Help them get started, Mom. Brad did not have bad investments. He had a gambling problem, and you knew it perfectly well. I pointed an accusing finger at Brad, who was sitting in stunned, furious silence. I tracked the withdrawals, Brad. You took over $200,000 of that mortgage money and funneled it directly into casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. You played high-stakes blackjack and lived like a king while I was downstairs in a freezing basement eating instant noodles just so I could hand you my paycheck. And the rest of it, I turned my unrelenting gaze to my sister, who was staring at the bank statements like they were venomous snakes. The rest of it went to Chloe so she could buy designer clothes, lease a luxury Range Rover, and pretend she was old money to her new wealthy doctor friends. Chloe's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I am a doctor," she screamed, her voice shrill and deeply defensive. "I save lives. I deserve to look the part. I deserve to live a life that reflects my education and my standing. You cannot expect me to walk around looking like some poor resident when my husband is an entrepreneur trying to build a business." "An entrepreneur who steals from his wife's aging grandfather," I shot back instantly. "You are a doctor, Chloe, but you are also a parasite. You let our parents commit felony fraud just so you could buy a handbag that costs more than a car. You let them charge me exorbitant rent to pay the interest on the loan you were actively blowing through. You sold out your own sister for a closet full of shoes." My mother fell to her knees right there in the dining room. She crawled toward Grandpa Harrison's chair, weeping loudly, abandoning every ounce of the social grace she prized so highly. "Please," she begged, grabbing the hem of his trousers. "We meant to pay it back. Brad promised his startup would yield a massive return. We thought we would pay the bank back before you ever found out. We were just trying to lift the family up and secure our legacy." Grandpa Harrison pulled his leg away from her grasp as if she were carrying a deadly disease. He looked down at my mother with absolute revulsion. "You make me sick, Vivian. Both of you make me sick. You preach about morality and family values every Sunday. Marcus, and you come home and rob your own father to feed the vanity of your spoiled daughter and her worthless husband." My father kept his face buried in his hands, unable to face the destruction he had caused. The pastoral authority he had wielded over me for my entire life was completely gone. He was nothing but a common thief in a clerical collar, stripped of all his unearned dignity. Grandpa Harrison gripped his wooden cane and forced himself to stand up. He was shaking with rage, but his mind was sharp and his resolve was absolute. He looked at my parents, then at Chloe and Brad. "I am calling my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning," Grandpa declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "I am reporting the forged documents, pursuing every civil remedy available, and rewriting my estate plan. Every one of you who treated Maya like a disposable source of money is out of my will. What remains of my legacy will go where it is respected." My mother let out a blood-curdling scream. "No, Dad, please. You cannot do that. We will go to prison. We will lose the church. You will destroy us." "You destroyed yourselves," Grandpa replied coldly, showing no mercy for the tears of a thief. I watched them panic. I watched the golden child realize her imaginary inheritance was gone. I watched my parents realize their untouchable social standing was about to be obliterated by a criminal investigation and a public scandal. It was exactly what they deserved after years of treating me like dirt beneath their feet. But the scene was not over yet. Suddenly a slow, dark chuckle echoed from the other end of the table. Everyone turned to look. Brad was sitting back in his chair, swirling the last few drops of red wine in his crystal glass. He was laughing. It was a manic, unhinged sound that sent a cold chill down my spine. The polite professional mask he wore for my parents had completely melted away, revealing the arrogant, manipulative grifter underneath. Brad took a sip of his wine and set the glass down loudly on the wood. He looked at Grandpa Harrison with a cruel, mocking smirk that displayed his utter lack of respect for the family he had leeched off of for years. "You know, old man, you can call your lawyer all you want," Brad said, his voice dripping with pure malice. "You can rewrite your little will. You can write us out of whatever imaginary inheritance you think you still have. But you are a little too late for that to matter, Brad." "Shut up!" Chloe hissed, her eyes wide with panic. She tried to grab his arm to quiet him, but he yanked it away aggressively. "No, Chloe, let us tell them the whole truth." Brad sneered, his eyes locking onto mine with a challenge. "If Maya is going to play the big, successful tech chief executive and air out all our dirty laundry for everyone to see, we might as well put all the cards on the table." Brad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, looking directly at my grandfather with dead, remorseless eyes. "That $500,000 your son borrowed, it is gone. Every single penny of it. We blew through the last of it 2 months ago. And since Marcus and Vivian had to use Maya rent money just to cover the minimum interest payments, things got a little tight when the variable interest rate shot up." My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she could not breathe. "Brad, what are you doing? Stop talking right now." But Brad ignored her completely. He was enjoying the cruelty of the moment. He loved watching the powerful family that had funded his lifestyle finally realize they had been played for absolute fools. They missed the payment in September. Brad continued casually ticking the months off on his fingers. Then they missed October. They tapped out all their credit cards trying to hide it from you and keep the lights on. But the bank does not care about your social standing, Marcus. The bank does not care that you are a prominent pastor or that your wife likes to host fancy parties. Brad stood up, towering over the ruined Thanksgiving table. He laughed again, a harsh booming sound that filled the room with toxic energy. So go ahead, call your lawyer, Grandpa. Try to protect your precious house and your legacy. But it does not matter anymore. Because last month the bank officially sent the foreclosure notice. You are all broke and the bank is taking this house. For one suspended second, nobody reacted. The word foreclosure seemed too ordinary for what it meant. It belonged in newspaper notices and cautionary stories, not in the dining room my grandfather had paid for with 40 years of labor. Then Brad smiled. It was not the strained smile he had worn while begging me for investment money. This one was colder, relieved almost, as if the last secret no longer belonged to him and that freedom had made him reckless. You all keep talking about the house like it is the only thing that matters, he said. It is not. Chloe turned sharply toward him. Brad, stop. I ignored her. He loosened his tie and leaned back in his chair, studying my parents with the detached satisfaction of a man watching someone else receive a bill he had helped create. Marcus and Vivian are the borrowers, he said. Their names are on the debt. Their signatures are on the paperwork. Whatever happens next is their problem. My mother's crying stopped. My father lifted his head. What are you saying? Brad gave a shrug. I am saying I protected myself. The atmosphere changed instantly. Until that moment, my parents had still been clinging to the belief that Brad was one of them, that every dollar they had handed him had purchased loyalty. I watched that belief die. Protected yourself, how my father asked. Brad tapped one finger against the table. I moved what was left of my personal assets months ago. Different accounts, different jurisdictions. Nothing connected to this house, nothing the bank can casually reach because Marcus missed a few payments. Brad seemed almost proud of himself. He began listing the steps as if he were teaching a seminar. The consulting account had been emptied first, then the brokerage account. Then the remaining cash from 2 failed investor rounds had been routed out of accounts that carried his personal name. He did not give exact destinations, and I did not ask. The point was not the geography, the point was intent. He had seen the collapse coming before anyone else at the table and had spent that time building himself an exit. I watched my father's expression change as each sentence landed. Marcus had believed he was investing in a son-in-law who would eventually repay the family. He was realizing Brad had been planning around the possibility that repayment would never happen. You told me the bridge financing was delayed, my father said. You told me the next round would close by October. Brad shrugged again. It did not. You knew that when you asked us for another $25,000. I knew I needed cash. My mother made a strangled sound. That money came from the emergency reserve. Brad looked at her without apology. You chose to send it. Grandpa's jaw flexed. There it was again. Every theft, every lie, every betrayal reduced to a technicality. Nobody had forced Marcus to forge papers. Nobody had forced Vivian to favor Chloe. Nobody had forced Brad to gamble. In their minds, that meant each person could point to someone else's signature and declare innocence. I knew better. Responsibility could be shared without being diluted. Brad had not merely accepted help. He had cultivated dependence. He had learned exactly which fear controlled each person at the table. With Marcus, it was the fear of looking unsuccessful in front of his congregation. With Vivian, it was the fear of losing status. With Chloe, it was the fear of appearing ordinary. He had sold each of them the same fantasy in a different package, and they had paid for it with money that was never truly theirs to risk. Chloe's face tightened. She knew more than she wanted us to know. Grandpa stared at Brad. You took money from this family, helped run up the debt, then moved your own property away from the consequences. Brad laughed once. That is called planning. No, I said. That is called making sure everyone else is standing in the blast radius when the bomb goes off. His eyes slid toward me. Call it whatever you want. I am not the one who signed the mortgage. My father rose slowly, disbelief replacing shame. We gave you everything. We paid your business debts. We paid for that car. We covered your losses because you told us you were about to close financing. Brad's expression did not change. And I appreciated it. Appreciated it, Vivian repeated. Yes. But appreciation is not the same thing as volunteering to drown with you. The words struck her harder than my accusations had. My mother had defended Brad more fiercely than she had ever defended me. She had called me jealous for questioning him. She had made me apologize when he mocked my career. She had taken money from me while I was sick because Brad supposedly needed another chance. Now he was explaining without embarrassment that he had never intended to share their consequences. Chloe stood abruptly. Enough. Everyone looked at her. For the first time that night, she did not stand beside our parents. She moved beside Brad. Mom, Chloe said, forcing her voice into a calm, clinical register. We need to be realistic. Vivian stared at her. Realistic. If the foreclosure is already moving forward, then there is no point pretending everything can stay the same. Brad and I have the children to think about. I have my career. We cannot have our names tied to a public financial scandal. My father's face went slack. Chloe folded her arms. Yes, our names. If people at the hospital hear that my parents lost their home because of fraud and gambling debt, that follows me. If the private school hears about it, it affects the children. Grandpa's mouth tightened. You took the money. Chloe flinched, then recovered. Mom and Dad chose to help us. Help you, Vivian cried. We mortgaged this house for you. I did not ask you to forge anything. The cruelty of that answer sucked the air out of the room. My mother took a step toward her. Chloe, we paid for your wedding. We paid the tuition gaps when you were in school. We paid the Range Rover lease. We covered Brad every time he came here saying his company was 1 month from taking off. Chloe looked irritated rather than ashamed. And I am grateful. But gratitude does not mean I should destroy my future because you made irresponsible decisions. My father gripped the back of his chair. We made those decisions because you told us you needed us. I needed support. I did not tell you to lose the house. Brad reached for his wine as if this were a negotiation he had already won. Exactly. That was the moment Vivian finally understood what Grandpa and I had understood much earlier. Chloe and Brad had never seen my parents' sacrifice as sacrifice. They had seen it as supply. Chloe glanced around the expensive dining room and gave a small, impatient shake of her head. Honestly, Mom, you and Dad are getting older. This place is too large for you anyway. Once the bank takes it, you can rent something smaller, a condo, maybe somewhere outside this neighborhood where the cost of living is lower. Vivian's lips trembled. You want us to move out? I want you to be practical. After everything we did for you, Chloe's voice sharpened. Do not make me responsible for every choice you made. Brad and I need to separate our finances from yours immediately. We cannot be dragged into litigation or collections because you failed to manage the loan. My mother stared at the daughter she had spent a lifetime elevating above me. I watched years of favoritism turn to ash behind her eyes. She looked at Chloe's designer handbag, Brad's watch, the half-empty wine glass, the remnants of a feast she had arranged to impress everyone, and finally saw the transaction she had mistaken for love. I had seen my mother choose Chloe over me hundreds of times, but I had never seen her confront the possibility that Chloe would not choose her back. That asymmetry had always been invisible to Vivian, because favoritism feels generous from the side doing the giving. She had confused constant rescue with closeness. Now faced with an actual crisis, the daughter she had protected was calculating distance. Marcus looked just as stunned. He had built his public identity around being the head of a stable, respectable household. In private, he had allowed every rule to bend around Chloe because keeping her happy made him feel successful. Watching her talk about separating her name from theirs was like watching him discover that authority, purchased with money, expires the moment the money is gone. Grandpa did not interrupt. He let Chloe keep talking. That silence made her more nervous than anger would have. She began listing practical reasons why she and Brad could not help the children's tuition, her professional expenses, the uncertainty around Brad's company, the risk to her credit, the possibility that hospital colleagues might misinterpret the scandal. Every sentence placed another layer of distance between herself and the people who had financed her life. I remembered all the times my parents told me, "Chloe has more responsibilities than you." That sentence had justified everything. The basement, the rent, the late fees, the way every emergency in my life was treated as a personal failure, while every inconvenience in Chloe's life became a family crisis. Now the same responsibilities were being used as reasons she could not help them. The logic had finally completed its circle. I could have pointed that out. I did not need to. Vivian heard it too. Chloe also began gathering her purse and phone as if physically preparing to leave would prove she had already separated herself from the disaster. That tiny movement was almost more brutal than her words. Vivian watched her daughter slide the expensive handbag from the table, the same bag she had praised minutes earlier, and understood that the person she had financed was already planning an exit without her. Grandpa followed the movement too. He looked at the bag, then at my mother, and shook his head once. No lecture, no sermon, just disappointment. For years that bag would have represented everything Vivian wanted our family to look like. In that moment it looked like evidence of what the performance had cost. Then she looked at me. The change was instant. "Maya," she whispered. I almost admired the speed of it. 10 minutes earlier I had been a bitter failure who would die alone. Now I was suddenly the daughter with $45 million, and the only person in the room who might still have power. "My beautiful girl," Vivian said, stumbling toward me. "Please." I stepped back before she could touch. She followed anyway. "We can fix this. You can fix this. You understand finance. You know the bank. You have the money. Call them tomorrow. Pay whatever they want. We are your parents." Brad rolled his eyes. "That is not how foreclosure works." Vivian whipped around. "Shut up. You have said enough." It was the first time in my life I had heard my mother speak to him that way. She turned back to me, crying openly now. "Maya, blood has to mean something. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we are still family. Your father gave you a home. I raised you. We fed you, clothed you, put you through school. You cannot stand there with millions of dollars and watch your own parents become homeless." The old version of me would have reacted to the word homeless. She would have immediately started calculating how to rescue everyone and how little she could keep for herself. That was the daughter they had trained, useful, guilty, endlessly responsible for pain she did not cause. But I remembered another number. $2,500. I remembered the winter I got sick. Last January, I said. "Were you worried about blood then?" My mother stopped. "I had a fever of 103. The basement heater had stopped working again. I was shaking so hard I could barely type. I asked if I could sleep upstairs in the guest room for one night. Vivian looked away. I continued. "You said no because Chloe had boxes of seasonal clothes in there, and you did not want me disturbing them." "Maya," she whispered. "Dad told me adults pay for comfort. Then you charged me the full rent anyway." My father stared at the table. "I had to choose between filling my prescription and paying you on the exact day you demanded. I was short for 48 hours. You added a late fee." Grandpa's head turned slowly toward Vivian. She shook her head. "It was not like that. It was exactly like that. You took money from me while I was sick in a room you would not have rented to a stranger for half the price and then transferred money to Chloe and Brad so they could keep pretending they were wealthy." Chloe looked away, but I did not let her disappear from the moment. "And you knew," I said to her. "Maybe you did not know every account number, but you knew Mom and Dad were funding your life while charging me rent. You knew my old bedroom had become your closet. You knew the basement flooded when it rained. You laughed about it." Chloe's face hardened. "This is not about childhood grudges. No. It is about what your choices look like when nobody is protecting you from the bill." Vivian reached for me again. I moved out of reach. "Please," she said. "I am begging you." I looked at her carefully. I wanted to know whether I felt revenge, pity, grief, anything that might pull me back into the old arrangement. What I felt was clarity. You taught me that help has conditions, Mom. You taught me that being family does not entitle someone to comfort. You taught me that adults are responsible for their own bills. She began sobbing harder. I am only applying the rules you made for me. My father finally spoke. Maya, please. Whatever happened before, this is our home. Grandpa's cane struck the floor once. No, he said. It was the home I paid for. You turned it into collateral. Marcus lowered his head. Vivian's knees buckled. She sank toward the floor, gripping the edge of a chair for balance. Chloe did not move to help her. Brad did not either. That indifference seemed to hurt her more than anything else. She looked at Chloe one final time. Say something. Tell Maya we are still a family. Chloe's expression was tight with fear for herself, not concern for our mother. Mom, I cannot fix this. Vivian's face collapsed. Then Brad stood. He pushed his chair back with slow, deliberate force and smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored suit. He had watched my mother beg. He had watched Chloe abandon her. And somehow he still believed there was one card left to play: intimidation. He walked around the table toward me. His smile returned, not warm, not nervous, predatory. That was when I understood he was about to explain why in his mind none of us had won anything yet. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive custom-tailored suit, a suit my parents had unknowingly paid for. He walked slowly around the shattered glass on the table, moving toward me with an arrogant, predatory swagger. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, and he clearly thought he could use his physical presence to intimidate me. He stopped just a few feet away, looking down at me with a sickening, mocking grin. He thought he was the smartest person in the room because he had orchestrated this entire financial disaster and walked away clean. You think you won today, little sister? Brad asked, his voice dripping with condescension. You think coming in here and flashing your shiny new bank account makes you a hero? You think you are going to walk out of here the victor, just because you sold some tech company? He let out a sharp, nasty laugh, shaking his head as if I were a naive child. Let me explain the real world to you, Maya. Having money does not make you powerful if you do not know how to use it. And you clearly have no idea how corporate banking works. You cannot just swoop in and save the day like a superhero. Brad took another step closer, lowering his voice to a threatening, malicious whisper. Once a major corporate bank files a formal foreclosure notice, the gears are already turning. I have dealt with these institutions. I know their legal teams. The debt has already been processed. The eviction timeline is locked in. Even with your millions, you cannot just call them up and beg them to stop. They do not care about you. Money cannot buy you time when the clock has already run out. He leaned in, his blue eyes flashing with pure malice. So go ahead and gloat. Enjoy your little moment of revenge against your parents. But do not forget, Maya, your name is not on the deed to this house. You are just a tenant. You are just a girl living in the basement. So when the bank shows up next week with the sheriff and the moving trucks, my in-laws are going to be out on the street, and your dark little basement is going to be padlocked right along with the rest of it. You are going to be carrying your boxes out to the curb right beside them. He smiled, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He thought he had delivered the ultimate checkmate. He thought he had put the arrogant upstart black woman back in her place. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I calmly reached over to the table and picked up my crystal glass of red wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue. Then I began to walk. I walked slowly around the edge of the dining table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I moved with absolute predatory confidence until I was standing directly in front of Brad. I looked him dead in the eye, holding his gaze until I saw the very first flicker of uncertainty cross his arrogant face. You are right about one thing, Brad, I said, my voice smooth, melodic, and lethally calm. Next week, the bank is absolutely going to send someone here to lock the doors. And you are also right that corporate banks do not care about personal stories or family drama. I took another step closer, lowering my voice so he had to strain to hear the executioner drop the axe. But you have absolutely no idea how the distressed debt process works in the highest levels of the financial world. Do you? Brad blinked, his smug expression wavering for a fraction of a second before he tried to force another arrogant smirk onto his face. What are you talking about, Maya? You think tossing around fancy financial buzzwords makes you sound smart? The bank owns this paper and they are coming to take this house whether you like it or not. I did not answer him immediately. I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a sealed packet bearing the lender's assignment stamp and the Fulton County recording information. I slid it across the table. It struck Brad in the chest and dropped in front of him. Open it. His hands were steady at first. That changed after the first page. The packet did not contain some magical cancellation of the debt. It contained the paper trail Brad had assumed nobody in this family understood. The assignment of the mortgage note, the transfer of the security deed, the completed foreclosure documentation, and the recorded deed, showing the property had passed through the enforcement process into the entity I controlled. Brad read faster. His face went pale. I let him finish. You were right about one thing I said. Once a distressed loan reaches the enforcement stage, emotion does not stop the process. That is exactly why I never tried to stop it with a family bailout. My father stared at me. I continued. When I learned the loan had gone into default, my team contacted the lender's distressed assets department. The bank wanted certainty in cash, not another promise from people who had already missed payments. My company purchased the debt position and the associated security interest. Brad looked up sharply. Buying a note does not make you the owner of the house. Correct, I said. That answer unsettled him more than if I had argued. Buying the debt made me the creditor. Then the existing foreclosure process continued. The required notices and sales steps were completed. My legal team did not invent a shortcut. We made sure every step that had already been triggered by the default was completed and documented. The resulting deed was recorded. I tapped the page in his hands. That is why my name through my holding entity is now tied to the title. I had spent days making my lawyers explain every document until I could describe the sequence without pretending the law was simpler than it was. That mattered to me. My family had survived for years by using confident language to make bad choices sound legitimate. I was not going to win by doing the same thing. The power in my hand came from a process that had been documented, reviewed, and recorded, not from a dramatic sentence at dinner. There was no secret favor, no improvised family agreement, and no promise that could undo it at the table. By the time I arrived for Thanksgiving, the important decisions had already been documented outside this room. Brad flipped back to the first page, then forward again, hunting for the loophole he had promised everyone else would exist. His lips moved silently over the recording dates and reference numbers. For once, he was not performing expertise. He was checking it. You planned this before dinner, he said. I planned it before you knew I knew about the mortgage. That answer moved through the room like another shock. My parents had imagined tonight as a family meal they controlled. I had arrived knowing the debt, the foreclosure status, and the ownership path had already changed. The revelation at the table did not create my leverage. It only told them leverage existed. My father rose halfway from his chair. So you saved it. Hope rushed into his voice so quickly that I almost felt embarrassed for him. I bought the debt so the bank would not take the house. You protected Grandpa's home. You protected us. I looked at him. I protected the property. He froze. Not you. My mother's sobbing stopped. I had not spent millions building a company just to hand another blank check to people who had taught me that every act of generosity could be converted into entitlement. I bought control of the debt because I refused to let the house disappear into somebody else's portfolio after my parents used it to finance Brad and Chloe. Marcus took a step toward me. But if you own it now, we can stay. We are your family. That was when I understood how completely he still misunderstood me. Dad, I said, purchasing the debt gave me the ability to decide what happened next. I chose to complete the enforcement instead of rescuing the borrowers who created the default. Chloe grabbed Brad's arm. Tell her she cannot do that. Brad kept reading. I pointed to the possession documents in the packet. My attorneys have already completed the steps required for me to take possession. I am not standing here asking your permission. I am giving you notice of what happens next. My mother whispered, No. 7 days, I said. The room went still. You have 7 days to remove your personal belongings and leave voluntarily. After that, the possession order will be enforced and the locks will be changed. My father stared at the pages as if they might rearrange themselves into mercy. So the bank is not coming next week. I almost smiled. No, Dad. Brad was wrong about that part. I looked directly at my brother-in-law. The bank is finished with you. Then I turned back to my father. The person enforcing possession next week works for the new owner. Marcus swallowed, who I rested one hand on the table. Me. The sound my mother made was halfway between a gasp and a cry. I let the silence settle before giving them the part they had earned. I saved the house, Dad. I did not save the people who mortgaged it behind Grandpa's back. His shoulders collapsed. I pointed to the recorded deed. The house stays. You do not. Grandpa Harrison stood up straight, resting both his hands on his wooden cane. He looked at the legal documents on the table, then at his cowardly son, and finally at me. A slow, proud smile spread across the old man's weathered face. He did not say a word of condemnation to me. He simply nodded his head in absolute silent approval. My father fell back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, weeping as he realized his ministry, his reputation, and his home were all destroyed. Chloe turned on Brad, screaming at him for ruining her life and losing their money, while Brad sat paralyzed, staring at the floor in complete defeat. I picked up my leather tote bag and slung it over my shoulder. I looked at the shattered crystal, the ruined Thanksgiving dinner, and the broken people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel worthless. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said calmly. You have 7 days to clear out of my house. The second those words left my mouth, the dining room exploded into absolute chaos. Brad lunged across the mahogany table. He completely ignored the spilled red wine soaking into his expensive trousers. His large hand shot out, grabbing the thick stack of legal documents I had just tossed at him. He gripped the heavy paper and ripped it right down the middle, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple with manic desperation. He tore the pages again and again, throwing the shredded pieces onto the hardwood floor as if physically destroying the paper would magically erase his massive financial debt. He was breathing heavily, a wild, victorious look in his eyes as the shredded pieces fluttered to the ground. I just stood there and let out a soft, echoing laugh. Did you honestly think I would bring the original notarized legal documents to a dinner table full of desperate broke liars? I asked. Brad froze, his hands still hovering in the air. Those were just copies, Brad, I said, my voice dripping with pity. The originals are locked in a secure, fireproof vault at my corporate attorney's office, and digital copies have already been filed with the county clerk. Tearing up a piece of printed paper does not stop the county sheriff from showing up at this front door next week. Brad's face fell instantly. The momentary illusion of victory evaporated. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting his chair before he collapsed heavily into it. He had absolutely nothing left. He had no leverage, no hidden funds, and no escape route. The arrogant white knight, who had swooped in to exploit my family, was finally forced to face his own ruin. My mother, Vivian, became completely hysterical. She gripped the edge of the table, letting out these loud, gasping sobs that echoed off the high ceilings. She looked at the shredded paper on the floor and then up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. "Maya, please," she begged, her voice cracking as she stumbled forward. "You are my daughter. I carried you for 9 months. You cannot do this to your own mother and father. Where are we supposed to go? How will we show our faces at church on Sunday? Your father's ministry will be completely ruined. The entire congregation will know we were foreclosed on. They will know we are penniless. You are destroying our lives over a silly grudge." I looked at the woman who had happily banished me to a damp, freezing basement just to protect her golden child. "You destroyed your own lives, Mom," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. "You chose to steal $500,000 from Grandpa. You chose to fund a fraudulent luxury lifestyle for Chloe and Brad. I did not force you to sign those forged loan papers. I just bought the consequences you created. You cared more about looking rich to your country club friends than you cared about having a roof over your head. Well, now you have neither." My father, Marcus, was practically catatonic. The great powerful pastor was sitting with his head buried in his hands, weeping openly in front of the entire room. He was murmuring frantic prayers begging God for a way out of a disaster he had brought entirely upon himself. He knew his career was in danger. The church board would have to confront evidence that its pastor had used forged mortgage documents against his own father. But then Chloe made her move. My perfect golden child sister realized that her husband was entirely useless and her parents had absolutely no power left to save her. She knew she had to try a different tactic. The aggressive entitled doctor vanished in the blink of an eye, instantly replaced by a desperate weeping mother. Chloe rushed around the table, carefully avoiding the broken crystal glass, and stopped just a few feet away from me. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, tears streaming down her flawless face. "Maya, listen to me." Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling with a masterful display of manufactured sincerity. "I know we have had our differences. I know I have not been the best older sister to you. But you have to think about the kids. You are an aunt. My babies love you. You cannot put two innocent little children out on the cold street. We need a roof over our heads. Just give us a few months to figure things out. You have $45 million now. Please do not punish my children for the mistakes Brad and our parents made. Let us stay. Please let us stay." It was an incredible performance. She was entirely willing to throw her own husband and her parents right under the bus if it meant she could maintain her comfortable, wealthy life. She used her own children as a shield, hoping my conscience would break, where hers had always been completely absent. She thought I was still the weak, accommodating younger sister who would bend over backward to keep the peace. I looked at my older sister taking in her expensive designer dress, the fresh highlights in her hair, and the diamond necklace sparkling at her throat. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. "You are using your own children as a shield, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my tone deadly calm and cutting right through her fake tears. "That is incredibly bold of you, because I seem to recall you singing a very different tune just last week." Chloe faltered. Her fake tears paused as a look of genuine terrified confusion crossed her face. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. I took a slow step closer to her, making sure she could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "Did you forget what you were telling the private school parents last Thursday?" I asked. "You bragged so loudly about Brad's booming startup and the multi-million-dollar mansion you claimed you were about to buy in Buckhead that the story traveled well beyond that parent meeting. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, people outside that school had already heard you repeating it like a press release. You wanted everyone to believe you were the most successful family in the room." Chloe's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but she could not form a single word. Her web of lies was wrapping tightly around her own throat. "So tell me, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, unforgiving whisper. "What exactly are those private school parents going to think next week? Let us see what they have to say when they find out the brilliant doctor and her visionary husband are completely broke, drowning in debt, and getting thrown out on the street by the county sheriff." I did not move toward the front door just yet. I let the absolute reality of my 7-day warning hang in the suffocating air of the dining room. I turned my gaze away from Chloe and Brad, completely dismissing them as the irrelevant, powerless parasites they had always been. I looked directly at the two people who had brought me into this world, the two people who were supposed to protect me, but had chosen to sacrifice me instead. My father Marcus was still slumped in his chair, his broad shoulders shaking as he wept for his ruined reputation. My mother Vivian was staring at me with hollow, terrified eyes, her expensive silk dress stained with tears and desperation. She opened her mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, another plea wrapped in fake maternal love, but I held up a single hand and silenced her instantly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream or shout to make them hear me. I spoke in a low, resonant tune that cut through their frantic sobbing with surgical precision. It was the voice of a woman who had spent a decade building an empire out of the exact bricks they had thrown at her. For 10 years I began, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the shattered mahogany table. For 10 years you made sure I knew exactly what my place was in this family. Do you remember my high school graduation, Mom? You refused to take a picture with me because my dress was not a designer label. You told me I was an embarrassment to your social standing. You stood in front of your wealthy country club friends and joked that you had no idea where my plain, unremarkable genes came from. You told me I lacked the grace, the beauty, and the ambition to ever be anything more than a footnote in Chloe's glorious shadow. My mother flinched as if I had struck her across the face. She reached out a trembling hand, her voice barely a whisper, as she tried to deny the ugly truth of her own behavior. Maya, please, I never meant it like that. I was just trying to push you. I just wanted you to fit in. I ignored her pathetic whimpering and shifted my focus to the broken pastor weeping into his hands. Dad, I said, making sure he felt the full weight of my disgust. You stood at your pulpit every single Sunday preaching to thousands of people about unconditional love, grace, and divine protection. But when you came home, you looked right through me. When I told you I wanted to build my own technology company, you laughed directly in my face. You told me to stop dreaming and learn my place. You told me I would never succeed because I was too stubborn and too ordinary to survive in the corporate world. My father finally lifted his head. His face was a mask of absolute ruin, his pastoral authority completely obliterated. I am sorry, Marcus choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whimper. I was wrong. I was so blind, Maya. Please forgive me. We are a family. We can heal from this. Heal, I repeated, testing the word on my tongue like a bitter poison. You do not want to heal, Dad. You just want a free place to live. When I came to you 4 years ago, drowning in student debt, working 80 hours a week and asking for a temporary lifeline, you tossed me into a freezing, unfinished basement. You let Chloe turn my childhood bedroom into a closet for her shoes, and you banished me to the dark. I took a slow, deliberate step toward them, forcing them to look at the monster they had created. Do you know how cold that concrete floor felt during the winter? Do you know how the damp air smelled while I sat at my cheap desk coding my software until 3 in the morning? I could hear your footsteps upstairs. I could hear you hosting lavish dinner parties, popping expensive champagne, and bragging about your perfect doctor-daughter, all while using the rent money you extorted from me to pay for the catering. You charged me double the market rate and called it a lesson in the school of hard knocks. You told me that the real world was cruel and that nobody was going to hand me anything for free. You said you were teaching me how to survive. I let out a soft, chilling laugh that made my mother physically recoil. Well, you were an excellent teacher, Dad. I learned how to survive perfectly. I learned exactly how the real world operates. I learned that in the corporate world, emotional manipulation and fake tears mean absolutely nothing when the bank comes to collect a debt. You thought you were breaking me down, pushing me into submission, but you were actually giving me the exact tools and the relentless drive I needed to buy the ground right out from under your feet. The dining room was dead silent. The only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of my parents as the full magnitude of their failure crashed down upon them. They had spent a lifetime nurturing the wrong child, investing their stolen money into a fraudulent son-in-law, and actively destroying the daughter who possessed the power to save them. My lease for that dark, damp basement officially ends today. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. I will not be paying you another dime. I will not be serving your plates or clearing your dishes ever again. And as for you, I am holding firm to my eviction notice. You have exactly 7 days to clear every single piece of your fraudulent, fake wealthy life out of my property. I turned away from them, completely severing the emotional cord that had tied me to their approval for my entire life. Grandpa Harrison had been sitting silently at the table, his weathered hands resting heavily on the carved head of his wooden cane. The old man, who had spent 40 years breaking his back in a manufacturing plant to provide a debt-free home for his ungrateful son, had seen enough. He slowly pushed his chair back. The scraping sound was loud and jarring against the quiet weeping of my parents. He forced himself to stand up straight, his posture returning to the proud, dignified stance of a patriarch who refused to be broken by the sins of his children. He did not look angry anymore. He just looked profoundly, devastatingly exhausted. He walked over to the antique coat rack standing in the corner of the dining room. He reached up and pulled down his old heavy wool winter coat. It was the same coat he had worn for the last 15 years, a stark contrast to the flashy, expensive designer suits my father and Brad wore. He slid his arms into the sleeves, adjusting his collar with slow, methodical movements. My father watched him, his face twisting in fresh, desperate panic. "Dad, please," Marcus begged, reaching a trembling hand out toward his father. "Where are you going? Please do not walk out on us. We need you to talk some sense into her. You are the head of this family. Tell her she cannot do this to us." Grandpa Harrison stopped. He turned his head and looked down at his son. There was no rage left in his dark eyes, only an abyss of ultimate, irrevocable disappointment. It was the look of a father realizing that the man he had raised was a complete stranger, a moral failure who had traded his soul for the illusion of status. He did not yell. He did not curse. His silence was far more punishing than any scream could ever be. He turned away from my father, completely dismissing his existence, and walked slowly around the ruined Thanksgiving table. His cane tapped a steady rhythmic beat against the hardwood floor until he came to stand directly beside me. He placed his large, calloused hand firmly on my shoulder. His grip was warm, solid, and incredibly grounding. Grandpa Harrison looked at the weeping, shattered remains of his golden child and his deceitful son. "I was wrong to give my property to ungrateful people," Grandpa said, his deep voice rolling through the room with absolute, unshakable conviction. "Maya, you did the right thing. Tonight I will leave this tainted house with you." For a moment I thought that was the end of it. Grandpa's hand remained on my shoulder, steady and warm, and I turned toward the hallway with him beside me. Brad made the mistake of believing that walking away meant I had lowered my guard. "You are not taking this house from me," he snarled. I heard the chair scrape behind us. Grandpa started to turn, but I moved first, stepping slightly in front of him. Brad came around the table fast, his face twisted with panic and humiliation. The calm corporate performance was gone. So was the smugness. What remained was a man watching every symbol of his borrowed success disappear in real time. He pointed at me. "You think you can humiliate me, threaten my wife, and walk out like you own everybody in this room?" I looked at him. "I own the property, Brad. That is enough." His expression snapped. He lunged. He did not get close enough to touch me. The front hallway door opened, almost at the same instant, and two men in dark suits stepped into the dining room. I had hired them before dinner and instructed them to wait outside unless the situation became physical. After reviewing Brad's financial history and the escalating threats he had sent through family messages, my legal team had insisted I stop treating him as merely arrogant. Each guard took one of Brad's arms before he could reach me. His momentum carried him forward, but they redirected him away from Grandpa and pinned his wrists safely behind his back. "What the hell is this?" Brad shouted, struggling. "Get your hands off me! Do not fight them!" Chloe screamed. The guards did not threaten him. They did not hit him. They simply held him in place while I stepped back beside Grandpa. "I warned you to be careful, Brad," I said. His eyes were wild. "You cannot have private thugs attack me in my own family's house. They did not attack you. They stopped you from attacking me. And this is no longer your family's property." My father finally found his voice. "Maya, tell them to let him go." I turned toward Marcus. "He just tried to put his hands on me in front of you." My father went silent. That silence told me more than any apology ever could. 4 years earlier, he had been willing to raise his own hand against me to defend Brad. Even now, after every lie was exposed, his first instinct was still to protect the man who had drained him. I nodded to the guards. "Release him if he steps back and keeps his distance." They loosened their hold. Brad jerked away, rubbing his wrists, but this time he did not come toward me. He tried to recover his swagger. "You think a pair of bodyguards changes anything? I still have a company. I still have assets. You cannot touch me." I picked up my phone. "That is the other thing you should know." Chloe stared at me. "What now?" "My attorneys did not only review the mortgage," I said. "Once the bank records showed repeated transfers from the second mortgage proceeds into Brad's accounts, they reviewed the supporting records we already had: the casino transactions, the representations he made when asking for money, the transfers tied to his business, and the movement of funds after he knew the debt was collapsing." Brad's face changed. What mattered most was that I had not created the evidence after the fact. The records existed because Brad had left a trail, while he still believed nobody around him had the knowledge or courage to follow it. Transfers matched dates. Promises to my parents matched cash withdrawals. Business claims could be compared against what actually happened to the money. My attorneys had organized the material before sending anything out, separating what could be proven from what was merely suspicious. That distinction mattered. I did not need to call Brad a criminal at my own dinner table. I only needed to stop helping him hide behind family loyalty. Investigators could decide what the documents meant. A court could decide what was punishable. My job was finished the moment I refused to bury the records for him. I continued. They found enough irregularities to prepare a formal evidence package. It has already been submitted to the FBI for review of potential bank and wire fraud. The room went quiet again. I did not say the FBI was coming tonight. I did not pretend an investigation was a conviction. I did not need to exaggerate. Brad understood what a documented referral meant. "You are lying," he said. I opened an email on my phone and held the screen where he could see the subject line and transmission receipt from my attorneys. No drama, no secret agent, just a timestamp proving the package had been sent. His mouth opened, then closed. Chloe looked from the email receipt to her husband. Until then, she had treated every problem as something money or family influence could smooth over. The idea that a file had left the house and entered a process, none of them controlled, frightened her more than my anger ever could. Grandpa gave a slow nod. "Good." Chloe grabbed Brad's sleeve. "What did you move?" she demanded. "What did you put in those accounts?" He shook her off. "Nothing illegal." That was not an answer, and Chloe knew it. "You told me everything was protected," she said, her voice rising. "You said the company was clean." Brad glared at her. "Shut up. Do not tell me to shut up. Are they going to investigate me too? For the first time all night?" Chloe looked genuinely terrified for something other than her social image. She had built her entire adult identity around being the successful doctor with the successful husband. Now she was calculating how quickly his conduct could become her public scandal. A flash of headlights crossed the dining room windows. Brad glanced toward the driveway. Then another set. He frowned. Who was outside? I did not have to answer. A tow truck had stopped behind the Porsche. Brad rushed to the window. No. Two workers from the leasing company were already photographing the vehicle and checking the identification number. One of them attached the recovery equipment, while the other documented the condition of the car. Brad spun toward me. "You did this." I shook my head. "I did not repossess your car. I simply stopped protecting you from information you were trying to hide." The lease was already seriously delinquent. The company that actually owns the Porsche decided it wanted its property back. He moved toward the front door. One of the guards stepped between him and the hallway. Brad stopped. Through the glass, we watched the Porsche rise slowly onto the tow assembly. The car had been one of his favorite weapons against me. He used to park it where I had to walk past it on the way to the basement entrance, then joke that some people were built for boardrooms, and some for utility rooms. Now the car rolled backward toward the street, its polished body reflecting the Christmas lights on neighboring houses. Nobody said anything until the tow truck pulled away. Brad looked smaller without it. Not physically. The suit still fit. The watch still glittered. But the illusion had been removed. The car was leased. The startup was collapsing. His supposed assets were under scrutiny. The house belonged to me. His confidence had always depended on other people mistaking access for ownership. Chloe sank into a dining chair. Her hands covered her mouth. Tears slid between her fingers, and this time they were not theatrical. She looked from Brad to my parents, then toward the empty driveway. "My perfect family," she whispered. I almost corrected her. It had never been perfect. It had only been expensive. Brad stared at me with hatred. "You think I'm going to prison because you sent some paperwork?" I met his eyes. "I think you are finally going to answer questions without Mom and Dad paying to make them disappear." His jaw tightened, but he did not move. Grandpa adjusted his coat. "We are leaving Maya." I picked up my tote and nodded to the guards. One walked ahead to the front door, while the other remained behind us long enough to make sure Brad stayed where he was. As Grandpa and I stepped into the cold Atlanta night, I heard Chloe begin shouting at her husband, and my mother start crying again. I did not turn around. Behind us, the house was still bright enough to look beautiful from the street. For 7 more days, it would still look like theirs. 7 days later, I returned just before 8 in the morning. The house looked different in daylight. Nothing about the brick, the windows, or the manicured shrubs had changed, but the performance was over. A county enforcement team stood near the front walk with the possession paperwork. A locksmith waited beside his van. My 2 security guards were there again, not because I expected a fight, but because Brad had already proved what desperation could do to him. Grandpa stood beside me in a dark wool coat, leaning on his cane. He had spent the week in the guest suite at my penthouse, and every morning I had found him awake before sunrise, drinking coffee and reading the same newspaper without turning many pages. He had not spoken much about Marcus. I understood. Losing faith in a son at 75 was its own kind of grief. The front door opened. My father came out carrying 2 cardboard boxes. The man who had spent years entering church beneath polished lights and handshakes now wore an old sweatshirt and work pants. There was no clerical collar, no tailored jacket, no smile prepared for an audience. Behind him came Vivian with 3 overstuffed suitcases. Chloe followed, carrying plastic storage bins filled with clothes, shoes, and children's belongings. The designer handbag from Thanksgiving was nowhere in sight. They had spent the week selling whatever they could sell quickly. Some furniture had disappeared. Several electronics were gone. The expensive dining set remained because there had not been enough time to find a buyer willing to pay what Vivian thought it was worth. The strangest part was the crowd. Word had traveled faster than any of them expected. 2 neighbors stood across the street pretending to walk their dogs. Another watched openly from a driveway. A cluster of church members had gathered near the sidewalk, speaking in low voices. Some looked shocked, some looked embarrassed for Marcus, others looked angry. The foreclosure itself was only part of the story now. Questions about the forged mortgage documents had reached the church board. Brad's financial problems were circulating through the same social circles Vivian had spent years trying to impress. The image she had protected at my expense had not survived a week without money holding it together. Marcus saw the church members and nearly dropped his box. He turned to me. "Did you call them? No. Then why are they here?" "Because people notice when the pastor who preached financial stewardship is removed from a house his father paid for." His face tightened. I did not enjoy saying it. I simply refused to lie for him anymore. One of the enforcement officers checked the time and reminded Marcus that the final walkthrough would begin at 9. My father nodded without arguing. The county officer never raised his voice. He did not need to. Each time somebody asked for more time, he pointed to the paperwork and the clock. That quiet procedural certainty was the opposite of my childhood home, where rules changed depending on who was asking. That surprised me more than anything. For years he had always had an argument, a scripture, a lecture, a moral framework that somehow ended with me owing him obedience. But legal paperwork did not care how persuasive he sounded from a pulpit. Vivian made another trip to the driveway. She had once mocked the old sedan I drove, while secretly building Apex, calling it evidence that I lacked ambition. Now she was loading her remaining possessions into a rented moving van with a dented side panel. A woman from the church approached Marcus. "Pastor," she said quietly, "is it true the board asked you to step away?" Marcus glanced at me as if I were responsible for the question. I looked away. He answered in a low voice. "I am taking leave while some private family matters are reviewed." The woman did not argue. She only nodded and stepped back. Private family matters. That was what people called wrongdoing when the truth was too humiliating to say aloud. Chloe came down the steps with another bin. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and for the first time I could remember she looked tired rather than polished. Her children were not there. She had arranged for them to stay elsewhere during the move, which was the first sensible decision I had seen her make in days. She stopped near me. "Are you really going to stand here and watch?" "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "You always wanted this." "No," I said. "I wanted you to stop treating me like I was worthless. This is what happened after all of you refused." She looked toward the people watching from the street. "You are enjoying the humiliation." I shook my head. Humiliation was making me carry laundry through the side entrance because you did not want your friends to know I lived here. Humiliation was charging me rent for a basement and using it to finance your handbags. This is accountability. The difference is that nobody is forcing you to pretend it feels good. She swallowed hard and walked away. By late morning, the driveway looked like an inventory of collapsed appearances. Cardboard boxes replaced designer shopping bags. A chipped lamp. Two mismatched kitchen chairs. Old cookware framed church photographs. Children's bicycles and plastic bins sat in uneven rows beside the rental van. The expensive pieces had either been sold, financed, leased, or claimed by someone else. What remained was ordinary. That ordinariness seemed to wound Vivian most. She had spent years treating ordinary life as a kind of public failure. Now neighbors who once saw catered parties and luxury cars were watching her decide whether a scratched end table was worth making room for in the truck. I did not mock her. The scene did not need commentary. By 10:30, most of the bedrooms were empty. The basement took me only 20 minutes. I went down alone. The air still smelled faintly of damp concrete. My cheap desk was gone. I had moved it to storage days earlier because, ridiculous as it looked, it mattered to me. That desk had held the laptop on which I wrote the first lines of code that became Apex. There were pale marks on the wall where shelves had once stood. A rust stain beneath the old pipe. A crack near the window I had asked my father to repair for 3 winters. I stood in the center of that room and felt no desire to reclaim it. Ownership did not make the basement less ugly. It simply meant nobody could ever order me back into it. When I returned upstairs, the locksmith had begun changing the exterior locks. Vivian was waiting in the foyer. For the first time that morning, she was alone. "Maya," she said. I stopped. Her eyes were swollen. Her voice had none of the sharp social confidence I grew up fearing. "Please do not close the door like this." I said nothing. She stepped closer. "We can still be a family. Your father and I can change. Give us a little time here. 1 month, 2 weeks. We can pay you rent." The irony almost hurt. "You want to rent from me now?" Her face crumpled. "I am asking you not to abandon your mother." I thought of the fever, the basement, the late fee, the years of being told that discomfort built character. I also thought of every opportunity she had been given to choose differently. "Mom, you had 4 years to decide whether I was your daughter or your income stream." She began to cry. "I am not doing this because I hate you," I continued. "I am doing it because every time there was a choice between protecting me and protecting the image you wanted, you chose the image. I will not finance that choice anymore." She reached for my hand. I stepped back. The enforcement officer called from the hallway. "Ms. Maya, we are ready for final possession." Vivian looked at me one last time. "Where are we supposed to go?" I held her gaze. "The same place you told me to go every time I said I could not afford the basement. Figure it out." She closed her eyes. Then she walked through the front door. Marcus was already beside the moving van. Chloe stood near him, staring at the ground. None of them looked at the neighbors anymore. Grandpa came to stand beside me. The last box crossed the threshold. The locksmith changed the final cylinder. I placed my hand on the inside of the heavy front door. Vivian turned from the driveway as if she wanted to say something else. I did not wait. I closed the door. The latch clicked once. For the first time in 10 years, the house was quiet. 3 months later, Thanksgiving felt like a story that had happened to another version of me. I was sitting in my penthouse high above Atlanta, barefoot on an emerald green sofa with a glass of red wine resting against my palm. Evening light stretched across the windows and turned the city into a field of gold below me. For years I had coded in a basement where the only view was a strip of grass at ground level and people's shoes passing by the small window. Now the skyline opened in every direction. The difference was not the height. The penthouse was not proof that I had become better than them. It was proof that I could finally choose where I lived without asking anyone to value me first. That was a smaller truth than $45 million, but it changed my life more. It was the silence, No one upstairs was waiting to remind me that I owed them something for taking up space. Across the living room, Grandpa Harrison was playing Shang-Chi with an old friend at a small table by the windows. He had become unexpectedly competitive about it. Every few minutes he would tap one of the wooden pieces against the board, make a move, and smile when his friend groaned. He looked lighter than he had at Thanksgiving. Not unhurt, lighter. He had moved into a comfortable apartment of his own after staying with me for several weeks. I offered him anything he wanted, but Grandpa had refused every extravagant option my assistant showed him. I spent 40 years learning the difference between enough and excess, he told me. I am not going to forget now because my granddaughter is rich. That sentence made me laugh harder than anything had in months. His relationship with my father remained distant. Marcus had stepped away from his church while the financial and legal consequences of the forged mortgage documents were being addressed. The process was still moving, and I stopped asking for updates I did not need. I had given my attorneys permission to handle anything that touched my property or my name. Everything else belonged to Marcus. Vivian had moved into a modest rental with him outside the neighborhood she once considered essential to her identity. The invitations, committees, and social events that had filled her calendar disappeared quickly. Some people abandoned her because they were shallow. Others stepped away because they had learned enough about what happened to understand that the image she sold them was false. I did not celebrate either version. I simply noticed that appearances were expensive when nobody else was paying the bill. Chloe's life changed too. She kept working. She was still a doctor. That mattered because her career had been one of the few things in her life she actually earned herself. But the designer performance shrank. The private school parents learned that the Buckhead mansion she had bragged about never existed. The Range Rover disappeared. She stopped posting photographs designed to make strangers jealous. For the sake of her children, I did not interfere with her work or try to humiliate her further. Revenge did not require me to burn down every room in her life. It only required me to stop letting her build comfort out of mine. Brad's situation was more serious. His financial records were under review after the evidence referral. The process did not transform into an instant television arrest, and I was glad. Real consequences did not need dramatic music. Investigators asked questions, lawyers answered them. Records moved from one office to another. The Porsche was gone. His company was effectively finished. Whatever story he eventually told about himself, he could no longer tell it from my grandfather's house using my money as proof of success. That was enough for me. People sometimes imagine revenge as one perfect moment, a slap, a speech, a courtroom verdict, a shocked face across a dinner table. Mine was quieter. It was opening my banking app and knowing every dollar was mine. It was sleeping through the night without hearing water drip into a bucket beside my bed. It was buying groceries without mentally subtracting rent my parents did not need. It was telling my assistant to book a trip, because Grandpa had once asked why I never traveled, and realizing there was no longer a real answer except, now I can. The first trip I took was not to the Maldives. I took Grandpa to Savannah for a long weekend. He complained that the hotel pillows were too soft, argued with a tour guide about a historical date, and made me take 20 photographs of him near the river because he disliked the first 19. It was ordinary and ridiculous, and exactly what I had been denied for years, the ability to spend money on a memory instead of surrendering it to somebody else's performance. One evening during that trip, Grandpa asked me something I had been avoiding. "Do you forgive them?" I watched the river before answering. "I do not know." He nodded. "Good answer." I looked at him. "You do not think I should—" "I think people confuse forgiveness with access," he said. "Those are two different things." That became the sentence I carried home. I had spent most of my life being told that because someone was family, they were entitled to access to my time, my labor, my money, my silence, my forgiveness. Every boundary was treated as cruelty. Every protest was called selfishness. Every sacrifice I made was considered proof that I could make one more. The truth was much simpler. I could forgive someone and still never hand them a key. I could stop waking up angry and still refuse to sign another check. I could understand why my parents became obsessed with status without volunteering to become the price of it. Forgiveness, if it came, would be for my peace. Access would have to be earned. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a second, old instinct tightened my stomach. Then I saw the screen. A message from Vivian. No emergency. No demand. Just 3 sentences. I hope you are well. I know you do not owe us a reply. I am sorry for how we treated you. I read it twice. Months earlier, that apology would have been everything I wanted. Now it was only information. Maybe it was sincere. Maybe hardship had forced reflection. Maybe she was lonely. I did not need to decide that night. I placed the phone face down. Grandpa called from across the room. Maya, tell him this move is legal. His friend laughed. Do not drag the rich finance genius into your losing game. I smiled and walked over. For the record, I said I know distressed debt. I am not your shunky referee. Grandpa pointed at the board. Coward. The 3 of us laughed. That sound filled the penthouse more completely than any party my mother had ever hosted. Later, after Grandpa's friend left, and the city lights reflected in the windows, I returned to the sofa with my wine. I thought about the house. I still owned it. For a while, I considered selling it immediately. Then I considered renovating it from top to bottom. I considered tearing out the basement walls, replacing every pipe, turning the room where I had lived into something bright enough to erase the memory. In the end, I did none of those things quickly. I had learned not to make permanent decisions just because I finally had power. The property was secure, the debt was gone, the title was mine. I could choose later what purpose it would serve. That more than the deed itself was what freedom felt like. Choice. My family had spent years making choices for me. Where I slept, what I owed, which sister deserved help, which career counted as impressive, which insults I had to tolerate because keeping peace mattered more than my dignity. Thanksgiving ended that system. Not because I became wealthy that night. I had already built the company. Not because Grandpa finally saw the truth. His support mattered, but the documents existed before he asked the question. The system ended because I stopped participating in it. That was the part nobody at the table understood until it was too late. They thought my power was $45 million. It was not. My real power was that I no longer needed their approval. Money gave me options. Preparation gave me leverage. Evidence gave me protection. But the decision to use those things came from finally believing I did not deserve to be mistreated simply because the people doing it shared my blood. If I could speak to the woman I had been 4 years earlier, carrying boxes down the basement stairs while Chloe measured my old bedroom for more shelving, I would not tell her to be patient. I would tell her to pay attention. Pay attention to every insult disguised as advice. Pay attention to every financial demand disguised as family duty. Pay attention to who becomes angry when you ask where your money is going. Pay attention to the people who call you selfish the moment you stop being useful. And then prepare. Not for revenge in the cartoon sense. Prepare for independence. Keep records. Build skills. Protect your accounts. Learn the rules governing the things people use to control you. Make sure that when the day comes to say no, your survival does not depend on the person hearing it. I lifted my wine glass and looked out over Atlanta. I did not hate my parents. Hate would have required too much daily attention. I did not hate Chloe. I hoped for her children's sake that losing the protection of being the golden child forced her to become an adult who could survive without consuming someone else. As for Brad, I wanted only one thing from him: distance and lawful consequences. That was my version of sweet revenge. Not destroying people because they hurt me. Stopping them from using me, then letting the truth of their own choices reach them without my money standing in the way. Grandpa made one last move on the shunk keyboard behind me and laughed when his friend, who had apparently forgotten his glasses, texted to complain about the result from the elevator. I smiled into my glass. They could throw you into a basement. They could charge you for the privilege of existing in a house that was already paid for. They could call you ordinary while spending your money to make somebody else look extraordinary. But they could not stop you from learning. They could not stop you from building. And if they were foolish enough to put the roof over your head into the hands of the very financial system you mastered in silence, they could not stop the paperwork from telling the truth either. I raised the glass slightly toward the city. They can throw you into the basement and make you pay for your own existence, but they cannot stop you from buying back the whole building. Stay quiet when silence protects your plan. Work hard when the work builds your freedom. Keep the receipts. And when the time comes, let the legal ownership papers speak for you. Happy Thanksgiving.